Good day, my name is Erich Schoeman. Welcome to Matters of the Soul. It is nice spending time with you. Today I am going to have a look at another program on boundaries, and this one is boundaries and abuse. So I'm spending time on especially boundaries within the intimate relationship in marriage, but I think this is applicable to all other relationships. It is applicable because the relationships at work and the relationships with family do have different contexts, but we can definitely derive a lot of the principles from boundaries in an intimate relationship and the abuse that happens there. We can use a lot of those principles in other relationships. So I'll try and make it applicable to other relationships, but just for the sake of keeping it clear in a certain context, I will apply it there. Now, the second thing is that I'm going to do this boundaries and abuse over a course of at least 2 programs. If I find I need more time, I will do another program, but I think it is just such a comprehensive topic. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to spend the first program on just understanding abuse and the various types of abuse that you find. And thereafter, we'll have a look at practical steps in the second program and dealing with abuse. And I'll also share the biblical view of abuse. What does the Bible say? Can you divorce when you're in an abusive relationship or not? What should you do when you're in such a relationship and you're a Christian? What do you do when your safety is at stake? So there's a lot at play here. And I'm also praying that the Lord will come and comfort you. And I pray for some healing oil from His Holy Spirit to also touch your heart. I understand that this is a very sensitive topic, and I'm going to try my best and approach it that way. Now, you get different kinds of abuse, and I know children also experience bullying at school, and some people experience bullying at work. So there are various degrees of bullying, but it also has abusive elements of it to it, and it actually just is a different form of abuse. So I won't specifically address children with bullying during these 2 programs. I'll have separate programs for that, because I think that is also a comprehensive topic. As bullying has gone over into internet, cyberbullying and all those things. And we've experienced that in our own home. Our own children have experienced bullying at school. So, and to certain degrees that's actually become serious, had serious mental health effects. I'm thankful that it's all better now, but we went through that battle, and I must tell you, it was not easy. So I'm going to spend some time with that as well. Okay, so firstly, let's then have a look at what abuse is. So if you have a look at the first, now I'm just going to give my little mantra from Matters of the Soul. At Matters of the Soul, we help you develop your emotional intelligence through Christian psychology media content. Okay, there you got it. Okay, so let's just say let's just recap a little bit of boundaries. Remember, I've done boundaries and introduction, boundaries in marriage, boundaries with families. So I've shared a lot about boundaries there. So I'm just going to touch on personal boundaries. Okay, personal boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave towards them, and how they will respond when somebody passes those limits. So those are guidelines, rules, and limits that you create to identify reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave towards you, and obviously for how you are going to behave towards them. It goes both ways, doesn't it? And also then deciding how you are going to respond when somebody does cross those boundaries. Okay, and then another definition will be boundaries are important. Boundaries, what they do is they allow for genuine care and love to thrive. They are 2 people who live in an intimate relationship as marriage. They are two individuals, but they try and live in a harmonious unit. And that boundaries there actually allow godly love to thrive in that situation. They're essential to self-respect and other respect. So it's like that little sentence that I've used a few times: good fences make for good neighbors. It's important. Good fences make good neighbors, because they create predictability, they create safety in the relationship. You know what I want and what I don't want, what I like and I don't like. They also mark those physical and emotional lines by which a relationship is governed. For example, when you're at church and the minister comes, you don't greet him like you would greet him when you're at the rugby game or at the football game. Yay, high five, man. Okay, well, some people do that. You usually greet him a bit differently depending on the context, meaning the context also decides how you're going to act. And then there's also some role, or the role decides how you're going to act. And you don't you don't touch inappropriate places on a person's body that is not in that intimate relationship with you. Meaning, if it's not your wife, you don't go there. That's a boundary, physical boundary. Now, in a marriage or in a closer relationship, there are physical, emotional boundaries, meaning how you speak to me, how you behave towards me, what I allow and what I don't allow, and what I like and don't like. Now, we can take this a bit far. I know people can take boundaries far, and they can use it to just control the other person. I don't like this. You should do that. Why are you doing this? And I must tell you, in the culture today, there's a hypersensitivity, what they call microaggressions. I have an issue with that, because now you cannot just distinguish between certain things. Then you're a microaggressive behavior. I mean, and it gets really ridiculous. So you can set up boundaries that really make life very complex and creates a lot of offenses for people. I'm obviously distinguishing between real offense and real discrimination, but these micro things are taking it too far. And if you have those things in a relationship, what I'm saying is, if you're offended by anything and everything the person is doing, then that is no longer abuse. You're taking offense, and you need to work with your own acceptance as well and your own boundaries. Otherwise it becomes this enforcing of my boundary on you. You are judgmental towards me. You should stop. You bigot. You do. No, you take responsibility for how you're going to respond. Stop controlling the other people. Then you're actually abusive. Okay, that's my 2 cents. So learning to set boundaries and uphold them is critical, especially in the face of abuse, and at times it can be life-saving. So the Oxford Dictionary gives you a definition of abuse. The verb is to treat with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly, to use or treat in such a way as to cause damage or harm, to speak to someone in an insulting and offensive way. So you can see those are very clear. That is the Oxford definition of abuse. And remember to, when I'm speaking about boundaries, to also remember the laws of boundaries that we discussed previously, because these things define boundaries. But you can go and have a look at boundaries in an introduction for that. That will, as I'm using the word boundary, I'm implying that I'm implying a lot of those laws as well. So it is a very broad definition. So that's why I'm not going into more detail. Okay, so the question is, what do we do when we experience abuse in a relationship, whether an intimate relationship or then I said family or work? What do you do? So there are 3 parts to boundaries. The first 2 are setting the boundary, the first 2, and the third is to decide how you're going to defend it. Okay, so I'm going to then look firstly at understanding the behaviors, because you need to understand, as I said, you can't take offense for everything. You need to understand when is it really abuse and when not. So we're also going to look at how to distinguish between just a bad day or somebody who has a dysfunctional relationship and an abusive relationship. Yes, there's a distinction. How do you distinguish between those? And then research shows that. And then have so you can have a biblical and clear psychological understanding of this when you have to make decisions or when you're helping somebody. Okay, so you get various types of abuse, but let's first look at the general emotional abuse. That's a way to control another person by using emotions to criticize, embarrass, shame, blame, or otherwise manipulate a person. So that's like a summary of what it is. It is a consistent pattern of abusive words and bullying behavior that wears the person down, and it especially breaks down the person's self-esteem and their mental health and their individual control and their decision making. So whether they can decide about money or emotions or what they want to wear or what they want to do, their opinion, it's belittled. So it is important to remember that that's like a summary of it. And I'm going to go into much more detail today to expand on what kinds of behaviors would now be considered as abusive. And not just expanding on that, so that you can understand it better. What's more, did you know that in the most common place to find mental or emotional abuse is in a dating relationship or a married relationship? So that's usually the most common. But then friendships also can become quite abusive. They can actually become enemyships, and family members, and that evil co-worker or boss. Now, it becomes increasingly as the further down, the further from you, the person functions like a co-worker, the easier, in a sense, it is to manage the abuse. I'm saying easier in inverted commas because it's not really easy. During my years in practice, I've seen countless people with abusive situations at work, even some life-threatening situations. So it was very tough. So I'm not minimizing that at all. But if you're married to the abuser, then it's extremely difficult, or if it's your close family. So the further away, you can change jobs, but you can't really change family. It just becomes difficult. And with relationships with your spouse, it's just more complex to get out. So, and friendships you can really break off. So, and that's why I'm focusing on one of the most difficult ones, being the intimate relationship. So, and physical abuse, obviously we can see the signs of it mostly, sometimes not, because the abusers are clever in how they do it. But emotional abuse is like one of the hardest forms to really see. And it's subtle. It's what they call insidious. That's a gradual, subtle way that it develops with harmful effects. So you don't really see it. And you know what? It creeps up on you. And the main thing is the reason that it creeps up on you is that it's also mixed in with nice behaviors. So then it creates confusion with you, because the person's nice to you sometimes, but then sometimes they're really, really nasty. So I use a circle and I say one side of the circle is white and the other is pitch black. So you get this mix. Sometimes this person acts in a way that, that's why I married him or her, or that's why we're friends. But then, they turn around and then they become really abusive and sharp and scathing. So the underlying goal of all abuse then is to control. It's to control that victim by discrediting them, isolating them, silencing them. So you do it usually they do it in private, not in public. And I'll also have a look at the personality disorders that link to this. I'll describe some of those, the narcissism and borderline antisocial behavioral patterns that we find go with this. So in the end, that victim feels trapped, and they become so broken down and wounded that it becomes very difficult to later on to leave, even to gain and gather the emotional strength. So a cycle just keeps on repeating, and it actually goes down as they continue with this. So they talk about this cycle of abuse. That's a really well-known cycle in the psychological literature. It's where that you got 4 stages of abuse. There's a stage where tension starts to build, and there's an abusive incident, and then the abuse. There's a honeymoon phase after it. Well, sometimes where the abuser either apologizes extremely intensely, or blames the victim for the abuse, or makes them feel guilty that it's their fault that the abuse happened. Or if they feel the symptoms of the abuse, then they blame them for feeling the symptoms because they're overreacting, whatever. And then there's a calm period, and then the tension starts to build. There's silent treatment, there's ignoring, there's irritation, there's the subtle words that come out every now and then. So you have all of those things, and it builds. And then kaboom, the abusive incident happens again. And what happens is, over time, the reason that the abuse increases is because the partner is actually becomes more and more, the abusive partner becomes more and more irritated with the victim's behavior. So even there's less empathy for the victim. And it's actually quite ironic. I'll go into that a bit later as well. So the question is, how do I know if my relationship is abusive? So you have to examine that relationship, and remember, it's often very subtle. It can be hard to detect sometimes, because that's why people stay in those relationships for so long, because you start to doubt yourself. That's the whole idea here. You have trouble to really discern, is this now what I think it is? Because when you're amongst other people, they usually have a different face. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But joking, but they do that. They go, they're so friendly with other people, but when you're behind closed doors, the mask comes off, and they become really nasty. So what you need to do is you need to ask yourself, how this person's reactions make me feel. And I'll go into more depth with that later on, to really just help you to discern what is the impact on you, what's the effect on you. Now, sometimes it's very difficult for you to just discern that by yourself. But, as I've progressed with psychology and psychotherapy and going for Christian counseling as well, I've had lots of chance to really practice having the experience of discerning the effect that people's behavior have on me, and what impact does it have, and how do I react to that impact? Meaning, does it make me feel belittled, and then I feel angry about the belittling, or does it make me feel rejected, and I feel hurt due to the rejection? So you start to think, if I was to act this way to somebody else, how would they feel? What would they usually say if I was to call them this? It helps you to understand what is normal, in a sense, what is expected, what is reasonable, because when you get used to this abuse. I mean, I grew up in a house where there was a lot of emotional tension and abusive words and stuff. And I mean, you get used to it later on. You become desensitized to a degree, a little bit callous, because you're used to people swearing at you. Okay, so what happens is you need to obviously see the signs. So that's why I'm going to elaborate on all these things. And I'm also going to work with some of your justifications that you might have. And it's important to remember, your partner does not have to do, or your friend or your coworker, all of these things in order for it to be an abusive relationship. It can, if there's even some of these things present, those behaviors are still abusive. It's important to note that. Sometimes the relationship might have a lot more good than bad, but those bad things, if they're bad, then they're bad. So one needs to then be honest with that. So there are usually things that abused people tell themselves to keep coping. And one of this is to minimize the effects that the abuser has on them. It's not that bad. You know what? He doesn't really mean it. He's got a good heart. He's just like a rough diamond. He's got this rough outer. He's like a crocodile, Snaps at you. But you can't stroke him. He'll just bite your hands off. No. We do those things to try and make it better for ourselves. And I'm making jokes today just to make it a little bit lighter. But it is. When you're stuck in those relationships, it's so difficult, and you have to find some way of coping. But this coping way actually just makes the problem worse, because it keeps you immobilized. It keeps you stuck. Some of the subjective experiences that victims experience, some of the feelings that a victim experiences that are usually experienced will be some of the following feelings. Feeling wounded, feeling frustrated, confused, misunderstood, depressed, anxious, worthless, helpless, battered, broken, and sad, and anxious and afraid, and terrified sometimes, and really, in Afrikaans we have a nice word, dear mekaar, tlakanie in Tswana. So sometimes abusive people display abusive people. So I'm going to have a look at some of the characteristics now of abuse. So you'll have various types of characteristics that I'm going to go into, like having unrealistic expectations, how they invalidate you, how they create chaos, how they use emotional blackmail, how they act superiorly, how they control you, all those. So I'm going to look at those various things and go into deep depth with them, so you can get a real nice picture of how those things function in a relationship. Okay, so let's have a look at those. And so what you will usually find is that the abusive person has these unrealistic expectations of you. Now, I know that I just want to say, I know we all display some of these things sometimes, but the difference here is that it is a pattern of abuse, and it occurs over time, and it has all of these controlling elements to it. And there's a real lack of feeling sorry for what you're going through, feeling sympathy, or even understanding what you're going through. It's just belittled, or it is minimized, or it is brushed off the understanding. Okay, so emotionally abusive people might not always see their own abuse. They might not always acknowledge it. They know, who wants to acknowledge it if you're the abuser? Because that'll bring on guilt, because it's not socially acceptable. It's not acceptable according to the Word of God. It is not a far cry from love. So they won't accept it, because it brings on either a bad rap, or a bad name, or they acknowledge their guilt. Now they have to feel remorse and guilt. They don't want to do that, and they don't want to humble themselves and apologize and lose control. So they won't necessarily see these things. But if you are watching this and you see some of these things in yourself, and you realize, look, this is maybe me, and you realize, hey, I'm the abuser, I'm just want to encourage you to say, first of all, you watching this program, that's already great. It takes a lot of courage to acknowledge your own mistakes and sins. And that is the pathway to freedom. So if you're going to acknowledge your sins, the Bible says repent and confess and repent of your sins, meaning acknowledge it before God. And repent means change your mind to think God's way, to think of the truth. So to change that will actually lead to freedom, to accept the truth. And sometimes the truth might be that you are in the wrong. And sometimes as a victim, you might also look at this and think, but hey, I've also done some of this. So it goes both ways sometimes, and I'll have a look at that a bit later. Okay, so I understand that it is difficult sometimes to be honest with yourself, but you can start off to be honest with God and just acknowledge your sin before Him. That will already set you on the path to freedom. If you're going to listen to this and you become more and more angry at the abuser, it will be understandable. It will be, I will understand that, yet, because you also need to become angry in a sense, because you need to stand up against what is wrong. But I don't want to fuel your anger to such a degree that you also become abusive. So I just want to wake you up and, in a sense, reach out a helping hand and say, you know what, here's the abusive symptoms. Do you experience this? Do you see this? Let's address this. Let's set boundaries. Let's take responsibility for what you can control, not for what you cannot control, for what you can control. And let's try to address this behavior because it is sinful, it is wrong, it hurts, and it damages you and other people. So the idea here is to resolve it and if possible, get hopefully the abuser will change. There are certain instances where I've seen that, albeit not the majority, but some people can change. Okay, so if you are a child watching this and you're at school and you are thinking, geez, these are my friends, then it will also be good for you to find a way then to address this. Okay, so and then I'll get to that in the second program. Okay, so the abusive party has unrealistic expectations of you. Now, what they do is they sometimes make unreasonable demands of you. I mean, they expect you to be a full-time mother and a worker and a mother and a perfect housewife and have sex available at night. And you must not spend a lot of money. You must keep the house perfectly clean. You know, stuff like that. Or they have unrealistic expectations. You should never say anything negative to me. Or they come and they expect you to put everything aside and meet their needs. It's about them. You'll see they're self-centered. So if you're busy with something, they disregard that, and it's about them. They demand that you spend all of your time with them. Now, they might tick some of these boxes, and like I said, so you'll get different types of abusive behavior. But although you are dissatisfied, no matter how hard you try to please them and give them what they want, there's always something wrong or amiss. And they criticize you then for not completing those tasks up until the standard that they've got, because they've got high standards that are applied to you, but not to themselves. They are conveniently very blind to their own mistakes. And they expect you to share their opinions. So they have opinions about stuff, and they come across strong. And if you differ from them, they will in some way either subtly dismiss you or escalate the way they talk so that they can change the way you think, or just show you that they are right, you're wrong. If it's about politics, cars, what restaurant's the best, they are right, you're wrong. Yeah? And they argue in such a way that there's not mutual respect. So, and this is subtle, or they are, So, and they, like, if you confront them with behaviors that they've done, they will demand exact dates and time for when that is. Give me an exact example. I mean, that's really unreasonable in conflict. We are not discussing conflict here. That is, we're discussing patterns of behavior. So what's happening here is that if you expect somebody else to give you an exact date and time by the second, otherwise you're not going to accept that as evidence. I mean, that's ridiculous. So you have to, but that's what they do. The reason for that is that they can just dismiss you. So if you cannot do that, they will dismiss the event as if it's never happened. I mean, your loss. It's not their problem. Second part, a part that they do, and I mean, abuse, I've got 64 symptoms in another article. I mean, there's just so much. Just some of the highlights are they invalidate you. Okay, so they invalidate you, undermine you, meaning they work against what you are trying to accomplish. That whether it be with the children, you say this, they then say that. They blame you for mistreating the children. They dismiss you. Whenever you have an opinion, you are dismissed. You are ignored. They'll walk into the room, you will be talking, they will start talking. They will, subtle things, they'll drink your drink. They'll finish your drink. They'll just cross boundaries like that. They'll eat out of your plate. Oh, a lot of people do that. I love it when we go to the restaurant because my wife always leaves something behind for me. And I order the big meal for her and for me, and then I can have her food as well. But I let her finish up until she's really done. And if she wants to take home the ribs, for a snack tomorrow, then I first ask her whether I can have a piece of ribeye. Negotiate with her beforehand, so that we're going to share, my food and your food. We talk about it. We agree. I don't belittle her in that way. What they also do is they refuse to accept your feelings by trying to define how you should feel. Because now in this argument, then what they tell you is that, or friends can also do this, co-workers, bosses, they don't accept how you feel. So you express how you feel about this, but then they would correct you because now you're not feeling correctly about this. This is how you should feel because they did not mean it that way, or you're seeing it the wrong way. Can you believe it? That's abuse. Refer to my program on fair fighting in marriage. Got English program on that, and also an Afrikaans series on fair fighting, and an Afrikaans series Vegreg vir Vrede. I'm also going to do a course on that, an online course that I'm going to set up. So go and have a look at all of the various fair fighting techniques, the techniques of unfair fighting and fair fighting, so they correlate a lot here. They also require you to explain how you feel over and over. It's as if they don't understand. So each time you explain, they bat you. They negate you, dismiss you. So you feel like you are stuck, because you're just saying the same thing over here. But it's as if they don't accept your opinion. You have to justify, and then you might find yourself screaming later on, And if you are upset about something they've done, they accuse you're being too sensitive, you're too emotional, you're crazy. I mean, that's a stupid reaction of yours. That's now really, you are just oversensitive. Well, some people are oversensitive, but it's a very nice way to just shield your own behavior by not acknowledging that you were too harsh. And you've hurt the person, they're just insensitive because you are working in the mines or in the police and you're tough. Yeah, Mr. T. You're so tough, you can now go out and bully other people and tell them they're sensitive if they don't like it. What's that? Get a grip, man. Okay. They refuse to acknowledge or accept your opinions or ideas as valid. Said that. They dismiss. If you request something from them, if you want something, if you need something, it's going to be a battle, or you're going to pay for it, or they're going to keep a record of it. Now, we've all done little bits and things of this, but here you really pay for it. You get it, and they keep score. They keep a little book. Or they see your needs as ridiculous. Oh, no, we're not going to go to the sea again. No. We're going there, they just control, they just steamroller you. They don't see the merit in what you're saying, what you want. If you don't like meat, red meat, you like fish, who likes fish? Those things. I like fish. They suggest that your perceptions are wrong. We'll get to gaslighting. But you cannot be trusted by the things you say. You're blowing us out of proportion. She always talks shit. I didn't swear. Almost. She always talks rubbish. You'll hear that. They said that. You exaggerate now. Or they'll use humor as a cover-up in social conversations, but then they dismiss you, negate you, and make jokes. And no, you're not laughing. Why are you laughing as a joke, man? It was just a joke. It's not just a joke. It was aggression masked by humor. And a joke is something that we both find funny. If I don't really find it funny, and it is actually belittling, is it still a joke? You like it if I do the same to you? Okay, and if you then stand up for yourself, they start to accuse you of being selfish, or you're needy if you want something, or if you want to buy something, you're materialistic. So the expectation is that you should not have any wants and needs. You should just, they are in control. They're sort of unreasonable with what you can spend, but they can spend. So it's different rules. So they'll come there with a nice new Mercedes. I had that with a client. The abusive husband, he's so smirky. And he comes there with his Mercedes. His wife drives an old Toyota Conquest. And he's so and he tells me about all the money he has saved in the bank, and he's got this and that. But his wife spends money and she wastes money and stuff. And I asked him, listen, you let your wife and child drive in that very old car, and you come here with your nice Mercedes. Who's got double standards here, and who's making accusations? Wanted to clap him. That would be abuse. Create chaos. That's another thing they do. They create chaos. They when you want to really, criminals also do that. They create chaos, and then they know what they're going to do. They distract you. But what they do is they start an argument for the sake of arguing. It's like just winning. They're irritated about something at work, and they take it out on you. They make confusing, contradictory statements. They call it crazy making. In psychology, we call it double messaging. You're giving two messages that are incongruent or not the same. So your body language shows one thing, but your words show another. Yes, no, you can do it. Yeah, well, take it, just take it. Or they say something, but then they say something else. No, they just say, no, you can take it, but then they actually just say, no, you can't. So they can create that chaos and confusion, and they have drastic mood changes. You don't always know. You hear out the way their car is driven up the street is in an aggressive way. What if they enter the house? Everybody's tense. Everybody leaves. They're in a good mood, and then suddenly the mood changes. You don't know what triggered it, but the mood changes, and they have these emotional outbursts. And then they start nitpicking at your clothes, your hair, your work. I remember a client telling me the father would come home and he would scream, "Take your feet off the couches, stop eating like that, pick up that day," and start criticizing about everything that is not in place in the house. Why is dinner not ready? And just be like a cloud of thunder that comes into the house. They create chaos, and they disturb the peace and the harmony, because they are now in control. And what they're doing it from a psychodynamic theory perspective, psychoanalytic as well, it's part of psychodynamic. What they're doing is they are projecting, they're transferring, they're taking old stuff and other stuff that they're projecting, they're transferring it into this new situation. They are just vomiting other stuff onto you. So their erratic and unpredictable behavior causes you to feel anxious and like you're walking on eggshells. And I've found that with many guys would say that their girlfriends or wives are like this as well. That they have emotional outbursts and anger outbursts. But it goes both ways. You find it all the way. Okay, so another one is that they use emotional blackmail. Let's look at a few examples of that. So they blackmail you. I don't know where the word blackmail comes from, if it's got to do with the black roses that the mafia sent you, to tell you they're going to kill you. But they manipulate you, they control you by making you feel guilty. So we distinguish here by, some people do this very subtly, and they work you up emotionally by making you feel sympathy for them, making you feel subtle guilt because now you have hurt them and you should feel bad about it. Children are very good at this. But something more worse is that they humiliate you in public or in private. It's almost to say, if you're not going to do what I'm going to say, then I'm going to punish you this way. I'm going to humiliate you. I'm going to crush you. Use your fears, your values, your compassion against you or other hot buttons that you have to control you or the situation. So they would use your fear of you're overweight and you don't want people to know it, and they'll use that against you. Or you're a Christian and you don't want to sleep before marriage, have sex before marriage, and they'll belittle you about that. Or you don't want to do threesomes and pornography or whatever. Or you have compassion for these 3 children and they'll use that against you. Or they'll then blackmail you to say, I'll take away that money, or they'll stop this. If you're not going to do this today, you don't deserve this money to give to those children. You're just wasting our money on these useless 3 children, whatever. They'll do those kinds of things. And what they'll do is they'll exaggerate your flaws, point them out in order to deflect attention from themselves and their own flaws. And so they won't have to take responsibility for what they've done and the poor choices and mistakes they make. So they would also deny that an event ever took place. They lie about it. So that's all part of a way to control you. You would say something, they'll just flatly deny it. I've had that They sit there in couples therapy. I know this to be true, but that person just denies. Now, sometimes some people deny certain things. They deny. Some victims would start to lie and deny because they are afraid of the abuser's reaction of aggression and control. That's different. I'm talking about somebody who does not value your respect, doesn't honor you. They just deny stuff and they just don't care how you feel about it. And they punish you then if you confront them, or a friend, by withholding affection from you, giving you that silent treatment. At work, what you will find is that they will, there's a book written by an author on psychopaths at work, where it's when snakes wear suits, but at work, what they will do is they will blame you in front of other people. They will make you look bad. They will call you names behind your back. They will do bad mouth you with other people. They will use triangulation to go and talk about you with other people. So they'll gossip about you, and they'll try to set up your boss against you, and those kinds of things in the workplace. So you'll find that as well. So there are many of those kinds of situations where they treat you with disgust, or your boss, or they just don't greet you. They greet other people. They don't greet you. They are hostile in their non-verbal behavior, their body language. They'll be nice with others, but when they look at you, they frown. They're irritated. Or they say one thing to you now, but as soon as you walk out, they're going to talk about you because you hear it later on in another way. Or they micromanage you, or that boss keeps on questioning you. It's because they name call you, and they would denigrate your work, even though it's of a good quality, or they would just take away some of the important projects, saying you don't have it. And then what we'll look at now is they also use gaslighting. And they also make you work harder than they pay you for. That most people would say, yeah, I do. Well, that happens, But coupled with the whole context and all of these things, it becomes abusive. Okay, another area that they do is they act superior and entitled. They treat you like you're inferior. They blame you for their own shortcomings and mistakes. So it's like you are eliciting them. You are causing them to act this way. It's your patheticness that it's causing them to be so angry at you. You made them angry. Like you went into their head and sat there and said in the limbic system, go amygdala, go talk to the prefrontal cortex and say, I'm angry. Do this. No, or you provoke them all the time. You might have done something that provoked them, but they don't acknowledge their own share. They doubt everything you say. If you said something, it's like, are you sure? Were you there? They're forever jealous about you and whatever you've done. They don't believe you. Or they question it. Were you really at the shops? Where were you? And they start checking up on you, and it's control with their trackers and their devices that they don't want you to drive the car that doesn't have the device, so they can track you. They WhatsApp you all the time, but that's later on. They make jokes at your expense, like I said. They just tell you don't make sense in your ideas, or it's stupid. And they just make you feel you're not as intelligent. You might have more intelligence than them, and so that it's still condescending, talking down to you. Or they control you, meaning they give you instructions all the time. They talk to you like you're a child. Some people in the military get stuck in that pattern at home, or teachers, when they talk to their spouses like they're children. It's true. Or some lawyers who debate their wives and husbands on certain points, and they become lawyers at home. So, or they use sarcasm, subtle aggression, to just break down your sense of self-worth and in what you're saying, and your value, and that you are saying this. And they act like they're always right, so they have to be proven wrong. And if they are proven wrong with clear evidence, they never acknowledge it. So they just ignore it, or they just stay silent, or they jump over to another one. It's like one of my friends at school. If I would win him at pool, he would just never say, yes, he won. Let's play again. We just have to play again, or we have to play black ball. I won him now. But that wasn't abuse. That's just an example of somebody not wanting to acknowledge he's lost. So in the end, you feel frustrated, you feel inferior, you actually get those subtle beatings, emotional beatings. So another heading would be that they control and isolate you. And that's the attempt here, because if they can control and isolate you, I mean, then they have you for themselves and they can abuse you. So they control who you see, how you spend your time, who's your friends, your family. And initially they might not say, no, you can't go there. But what they will do is they will criticize those people and they will blame you, and then they'll make you feel guilty for going against what they feel, and that you're supposed to be more loyal to them than to them. And they can even use Bible verses against you. You're supposed to leave your husband, your father and mother, and cleave to your wife, or you're supposed to now stay with me. That's what a good wife would do. I'm not saying that you should. If I'm not, and please note that I'm not saying for the husband who is saying to his wife, you can't speak to your mother, who's got an enmeshed relationship with her mother. There needs to be some reasonable boundaries between you. That's different. I'm talking about that in a demeaning way. They accuse you of cheating. They're forever jealous of outside relationships. They hide your car keys. They lock the doors with you inside. They refuse for you to go, like within our family, one person was refused to go and see her grandchild in hospital when she was ill. Those things, they want her to, and I was at a party once where the lady had to sit on the man's lap all the time. And if she went to the loo, her daughter said, okay, let's go to the loo. That at least there we can talk. He would go with, to the loo. So he was just so controlling there. And they demand to know where you're at all times. And if you come 5 minutes late, there's an overreaction about that. They treat you like you're a possession, your property. So they own you, but it's not. It doesn't go the other way around. And they're very passionate sometimes. And if they show love, it seems like they love you, but they're actually very dependent on you as well. So we'll have a look later on the personality characteristics playing a role. But it confuses you, and they can express that they love you, but they don't really love you because they love to be in a relationship where they are in control and where they can get what they need, but they don't have to give, and they can show their bad side and hide it, show it to you and hide it, and all those things. So they use jealousy and envy as a sign of love then, but it actually isn't love. So they are coercing you into spending all of your time with them. And they control the finances, what you do. Some husbands control all the finances. They won't let their wives see anything what's going on. I'm not talking about a nice, trusting relationship where you trust your partner and you don't have to know what's happening in the finances. But those things. Just 2 scriptures on this that's interesting. The Proverbs 12:18 in the Good News Bible says, "Thoughtless words can wound as deeply as any sword, but wisely spoken words can heal." Can you see the words can wound as deeply as a sword? Proverbs 11:9 says, "With their words the godless destroy their friends, but knowledge will rescue the righteous." Wisdom as well. So it's the words that the godless use destroys people. They destroy friendships. That's like swords. So you can hear that the word of God is also describing how people can hurt other people with their words. And there's lots of other things. In Ephesians 4:29, the word says, you need to be conscious of how you're speaking to other people so that you uplift them, that you build them up. But the words that go out of your mouth should be words that are encouraging and building up. Now, obviously, all of us do stuff, that hurt other people. But remember, it's a pattern of abuse. Okay, so we have lots of various types of abuse that I'm now described, and I'm going to just describe a few more types, like gaslighting. So people have asked me what is the definition of gaslighting. It is when you're manipulating somebody by psychological means into doubting their own sanity. So you are making them think that they are to blame for what's happening here, that they are crazy. So you are then making them, it appears as if they are the one who's wrong all the time. So you're arguing in such a way that some of my clients have said they turn it around. They then always put the blame on me. They always find a way to accuse me as if I was the one who started this first of all. I did this, they didn't do that. And I then feel guilty and apologize, but they never apologize. So you're leaving feeling confused, but also hurt and upset, and you're still sitting with the hurt, but that's negated, that's dismissed. So you are sitting with all of it. It's like a dustbin in your heart that is becoming fuller and fuller because they're not taking ownership for their share. Okay, so there's that, and there's another thing that they do is that also sometimes isolate you from family and friends. That especially if you've got good relationships with your family, they will try to take you away from your family because it is easier for them to. It's like a lion that attacks a herd, but they don't attack the herd there. They attack the one on the fringe. That's the one that's isolated, the one that's more alone, because it's easier. Now, they obviously also name call you. We call it blaming, naming, shaming. So shaming, making you feel worthless and shameful for things you've done. And it's a lot of verbal abuse. It's verbal and emotional abuse go together, and they also trivialize whatever you're concerned about. If you confront them, whatever, it's always an overreaction on your part, or you're just full of nonsense or whatever. So it's important to know that this progresses slowly but surely, and that's why you may not initially. That's why you might have been in this friendship or at this workplace for a long time, because the balance shifted. It used to be positive and with some negativity, but then there's my doggy, life happens, hey? And then it shifts. And later on, it's so overwhelming and all around you that you are actually quite ensnared by it. Okay, so the impact of emotional abuse. Let's have a look at how does it affect the victim then. Okay, so it's usually the main one is that they lose their sense of self without a mark or a bruise. The emotional abuse causes them to lose their sense of self. If there's physical abuse, obviously you lose your sense of physical safety. You lose the sense that your body is yours to be treated the way you want. If there's sexual abuse, it is your body that is being dishonored. The boundaries are crossed. So with children especially, they lose the sense of self in terms of where my sexual boundary lies, where my body ends and another person's begins. So they will allow things to happen, sexual things or physical abuse or emotional abuse. We also lose that sense of what is okay and what's not okay. What should I allow not? Because in this relationship with this person, they take things that are not theirs. They overstep boundaries to such a degree that I start to doubt whether that boundary is really my boundary to set, and whether I can set that boundary. Can I say no to this kind of sex or this kind of touch? I've had a lady who says men would touch her breasts at work. Those kinds of things, or touch her body, her bottom or buttocks or whatever. So, or rape in the marital relationship, where you are forced into a situation where it is against your will, and it might be, but the Bible says you should not withhold sex from each other. I mean, she was withholding. No. You need to discern. There's always, the Bible does, when you read one verse, you need to read all the verses to see the full picture. Because if you read only one verse, you're going to really miss the biblical picture. I mean, you can justify anything from the Bible if you want to, if you just nitpick a verse, cherry picking, they call it. Okay. So you need to do it with love and respect and honor, and laying down yourself as well, and talking to your wife, negotiating, and in that loving relationship, there the intimacy comes, the sexual intimacy. So that person loses that sense of self. Where do I end and where do I begin? What do I allow and what's okay and what's not okay? So you will find with children or people who they grow up, and they sometimes, we've posted a picture, what Henry Cloud and John Townsend said is they confuse boundaries. They will allow the bad to come in and block out the good. So if people give them compliments and nice things, they actually block that. But if people criticize them, they actually take that. So if people want to abuse them, or they're in a romantic relationship, that person wants sex, they don't actually want to give it, they give it. But they block the good and they allow the bad in order to please the person, not to get rejected. So the victims might sometimes have their own insecurities, low self-esteem already, lack of boundaries and assertiveness already, might even have a lack of taking ownership for their lives. Now, they might not have any of these, so this is not a justification for abuse, but the victim might already sit with this, and that's why they sometimes allow more of it. But the abusive relationship just makes it worse. We've seen with friendships with children at school, my goodness. We've seen suicides that children have done after being verbally and physically tormented, broken down, name calling, isolated from other people, alienated from other people, and like the bully would go and spread rumors and lies about them, severe rumors and lies to alienate that person and to cause other people to be hostile towards them. It's terrible. So similar patterns, like I said. Okay, so they the wounds end up to be self-doubt, worthlessness, self-loathing. So they start to actually victimize themselves later on. That's why they start to cut themselves, or start to self-medicate with alcohol or pills to escape the fight, flight, freeze, to get out of it. Because if you fight it, we'll have a look later on how to handle it, and you'll see if you start fighting it, it's as if you can't get out of it. Now, over time, all of those things start to build up, and what they do is the victims start to actually adopt that perspective on themselves. So they start to believe the abusive relationships lies. They start to believe what we call it is they actually start to agree with the abuser, and that abuser's words becomes an internal critic, and they start to agree with the internal critic. So some Christian counselors might say it's like you're agreeing with the devil as well. You're making agreements, you'll hear them, with lies, but they'll internalize it. So, but that's the truth. That's the truth about me, and to start to see themselves. But it's because of ongoing breakdown. So, and it can then obviously impact the victim's friendships and relationships because they start to worry about how people see them. Will people truly like them? They sort of have a problem with trust. They either want to hide the abuse because of shame, or they are so worthless that they don't feel like anybody would like them, or they feel worthless. They aren't worthless, they feel it, but they start to doubt whether people will really be interested to be friends with them, or whether they can really do this job because they've been told so many times how useless they are. And with friendships as well, what people do is they tell you won't find any other friends, like children would do that, or at work, you won't be good for any other job. Meantime, back at the ranch, you're very good. And in the end, they can develop psychological and psychiatric problems like eating disorders, insomnia, depression. They get what we call stress-related disorders, because stress releases a lot of stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, all those things. And over time, it actually affects the cardiovascular system, the digestive system, and all those things. It actually starts to harm the body. And stomach ulcers, anxiety, all those things might develop from it. Okay, so it can get really bad. Now, if you're in any of those situations, you need to reach out for help. And I'm going to look at that in the second program. Okay, so it's important for you to just reach out. I'm going to spend 5 more minutes, and then I'll end today's program. And then next time we'll start off with how do you handle this. I just want to say something about the difference between psychological violence and a dysfunctional or conflictual relationship. So psychological violence, like I said, is that constant pattern of breakdown. control, fear of the abuser, entrapment, severe psychological and physical and those harms. But the dysfunctional relationship, or relationship with just a lot of conflict, like fat and fear, fat and fire, or whatever, fuel and fire, I don't know what it is in English. It's just a couple that doesn't, or people that don't really know how to manage these day-to-day problems. They don't really know how to manage conflict well. There's a deterioration with intimacy. They don't build up the relationship. So the breakdown becomes abusive, and abusive elements creep into the relationship later on with resentment that builds up and those things. Now, it might end up to become psychological violence, but it doesn't necessarily equate to an abusive relationship, but it might become very abusive, and especially with breakups and divorces, there you get it, that it can become very abusive, and it will then be psychological violence as well. So just sometimes when you say, but geez, I see some of these things in my relationship, now then we just need to discern whether it is indeed a dysfunctional relationship, or is it a full-on psychological abusive relationship, physical abusive relationship. But sometimes we might say, but obviously the psychological abusive relationship is dysfunctional. But that's why you need to look at some of all of the facets of the the psychological abuse and the physical and those abuse, and then look at the effect on you, and also look at whether the person is repentant, whether the person has insight. Is there any form of understanding, empathy? Is there change at all in that person? If there's no real want to change, no real insight on that, and awareness on that person's part of how they're treating you, they're not listening to you, not taking any feedback, then that becomes abuse. But if they're willing to hear you, and they're working on themselves, and they understand, and they're changing, they're just rigid, or they are, then, and I would say that's not necessarily an abusive relationship, just a dysfunctional one, that they fall into this dysfunctional patterns. They're not, if it makes sense. And sometimes you get what we call reciprocal abuse. So both parties actually are abusers and both are victims. So they vary the roles of abuser and victim. So they provoke each other. They have these huge fights, and they break each other down. And it's a vicious relationship. What's that, Mr. and Mrs. Smith? Yes. So they elicit a pattern of abusive control. We call it an escalated power struggle between the two. Who's right, who's wrong, and they break each other down. But why do you want to be married then? Okay, and then what's the difference between emotional abuse and occasional outbursts of anger? That's a good question as well. And I think it's important to distinguish that as well, as it's very similar to what I've just said. I think it's just to distinguish between everybody who has a bad day and here and there has a negative or harsh word, and whether it's an ongoing pattern of behavior that is so rigid and that is designed to control and manipulate you and subjugate you to that other person. And it happens very intentionally as well. So for instance, let me give you an example that I found on Focus on the Family's website, when the lady said, "When I set the table for dinner, my husband would come to the kitchen, walk around the table, and adjust the placement of the silverware, plates, and glasses, saying, 'Someday you will get it right, or maybe not.'" It's a focused attempt to break her down. And then a question: why does one person abuse his spouse, friend, or relative? Why? There might be lots of reasons for this. They talk about unresolved childhood trauma. It's a complex personality problem, can be that, narcissism, borderline personality disorder, some dependent traits, and a personality disorder being a very rigid pattern of behavior over time that causes a lot of disruption in interpersonal relationships. And sometimes the perpetrators are in as much psychological internal pain, and they sometimes have a lot of struggle to overcome their own destructive patterns, but it does not justify their behavior, not at all. They might also deal with a lot of external stressors like work stress, financial stress. They might have limited emotional intelligence, meaning they've had a lot of developmental delays during their developmental years in delaying their emotional development. There might also be substance abuse that usually plays a huge role. If there's involved, drugs and alcohol take away some of the conscience of a person. It numbs it, or and that might play a huge role as well. But why they do it, it's obviously from a biblical standpoint, it is a sinful behavior that where the person is under the influence of his own sinful flesh and the devil through demonic interactivity, as you will see in Romans 6 as well, that they're actually under the influence of the God of this world. I'm not saying all of them are possessed. I'm saying that it is an influence that they're allowing. And it is also a place of very destructive self-protection through aggression. And then it is also just plain sinfulness, selfishness. And so there is empathy for the abuser, yet there's not justification of their behavior, but there might be description of why they are doing some of those things. They might also have limited supportive relationships, lots of rejection, unresolved anger, struggles with anger, resolving anger and conflict management skills. Anger management skills might be there, might even be a little bit of a lack of actual intelligence, a lack of understanding, a very rigid personality type. Some of the bipolar mood disorders might have some of these traits where there's explosive mood outbursts. And then sometimes there might also be a medical condition underlying, like literally a neurological tumor or a disorder, something, or brain damage, a traumatic brain injury that might cause some of these behaviors. But then we won't say that it is outright abuse, that it is, some of those behaviors might be abusive, but whether it's intentional or it's due to the neurological symptoms are then to be diagnosed and decided. But whatever, it needs to be handled, and you as a victim or a person experiencing it needs to be on the receiving end. You need to have strategies on how to deal with it. Is there hope for these people? Yes, they can move from victims to survivors to overcomers. Is God really interested in them? For sure. Is it God's will that people be abused? Not a chance. Go and look at 1 Corinthians 13. See the description of love. It is kindness, it is to protect, it is to love, to care, it is to not be irritable, not be upset and angry, not be offended. It's to really protect the other person. And God's always out to protect. If you look at the fruit of the Holy Spirit, it is love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness. There's self-control, there's humility, there's serving another. So no, that's not the way the Lord wants us to do. He talks about unselfishly loving the other. And he's very protective of children and women, especially. If you go and look at the word, there's lots of scriptures, people who say God is against protecting against women. No, go and look at the Bible. Please read the Bible. And then there's the last point is that the Lord wants to reach out and help, and he wants to really make a difference in your life. He wants to be there for you. Psalm 18 says the Lord reaches down from on high, he grabs hold of you and pulls me out of deep waters. He wants to be the one who dries your tears, and he wants in Isaiah 61 to give you the oil of joy for mourning. He wants to give you a rest as well in Matthew 11:28. He wants to comfort you. In Isaiah 40, he says, comfort my people, comfort them. The Lord wants to comfort you, and he wants to be your protector as well. Psalm 91. And in Psalm 18, you see how the Lord comes to protect you. So he loves you. And if you're a child, or you're even, I've seen husbands who are abused by their wives, physically, emotionally, everything, the Lord wants you to help you. So in the next program, I'm going to pause and tell you about the steps you can take, okay, on how to handle this and get out of this situation. God bless you, and I will see you next time. Go and have a look at YouTube. If you're not watching this on YouTube, go and have a look at YouTube, Matters of the Soul. Go and like, subscribe, click the bell, please, and follow us everywhere. And if you want to sow into this ministry financially, please go to mattersofthesoul.org and go and see how you can donate and help us to do all of these things that we're doing. God bless. Goodbye.